This video is brought to you by Straight Goods News, Canada's alternative online news source. Visit straightgoods.ca.
That is the issue that is of importance here. The fact if the Liberals were doing dirty tricks and the Conservatives were doing dirty tricks, so we could certainly look at that in the context of a public inquiry. But let's not lose sight of the much more serious issue of people misrepresenting themselves as Elections Canada and telling you to go vote in the wrong place, so your ability to vote is deliberately interfered with.
So the House will be holding a vote this evening on giving Elections Canada more investigative powers. You folks have pointed out that there's no guarantee that the government will actually bring forward legislation. What's the advantage of having a judge lead a public inquiry that could therefore compel cabinet ministers, for example, to testify?
We seen from Canadians across this country a great deal of concern about what's been happening. We need to get to the bottom of it. I don't think people are confident enough just saying, well, hopefully Elections Canada will hopefully have the resources they need to hopefully get to the bottom of this. We need to find out what happened, why was this so widespread, who was involved, and I think that you need a public inquiry and you need a judge who can say, I'm calling on the main participants and I'm calling on all the small players, and you're going to come and you're going to testify and we're going to find out, because this is about the electoral trust that Canadians put in this system.
For Guelph is saying that they're not the same. It's not an appropriate comparison. I mean, is it the same? It's, to put out a robocall saying, giving a false name on a false number, not saying this is from the Liberal MP, that versus what apparently happened in Guelph on the other side. I did the same thing.
If you don't fill out your Elections Canada's forms right, you get spanked. If you monkey around with the phone calls, you get spanked by the CRTC. But if you pretend that you're Elections Canada and you lie to voters and tell them to go to the wrong place, then you are interfering with the fundamental right of Canadians to vote. And that is a very, very serious undermining of our whole democratic system. That's the difference.
Mr. Angus, do you think that the Conservatives have had a bit of good news today? They've kind of evened the score. Have they successfully run the day of the area business?
I think what's really the reason Canadians are turned off of parliamentary politics is that when a government finds that a win is throwing mud at somebody else, that is not a win for Canadian democracy. A win for Canadian democracy is a government that shows that they take the issue of electoral fraud seriously. So the fact that the Liberals, whether they screwed up or they deliberately played games in Guelph, is the side issue. The big issue is you've got a government that doesn't seem to think it's a problem that Canadians were misled in their right to vote.
You suggested that it was a far bigger issue on the Conservative side. That you suggested there was a pattern nationwide. Why do you say that? What's your evidence of that?
What we've been seeing from the calls we're getting from across the country and the people who brought forward evidence is that there were calls being made. There were calls being made representing Elections Canada, telling people to go to the wrong polls. That is a deliberate interference with the right to vote. And Canadians have a right to find out how widespread that is. Are we to believe that there's Pierre Poutine and Guelph managed this whole campaign? Someone paid for those calls. Someone had access to the Conservative database. It just does not strike me as credible that one person is behind all this. Well, I mean, if someone wants to get to a payphone and just start making a whole bunch of crank calls, good luck. That's just not very effective. But if someone starts targeting key ridings and knows who the Conservative supporters are and who isn't, you can be very effective. And someone obviously knew who that was. So they would have to have access someone had access to the Conservative database, someone had scripts, and someone was doing very similar calls in various parts of the country. That suggests a much wider spread pattern. That's why we need a larger investigation.
Last question.
Mr. Angus, this past weekend it was the Manning Centres Convention in Ottawa, and you've been talking about voters becoming disengaged from the political process. They were talking about it too, and one of the ideas that came up was either getting rid of question period or not televising it. And one Conservative backbencher called question period stunningly horrible, a complete waste of time, and a public zoo. You make pretty good use of question period. You're able to get your points across pretty effectively. What do you think of that statement?
Well, I think the Conservative government would love to get rid of question period. They seem to hate being questioned in any capacity, so I'm sure they'd find it much more efficient. I'm sure there's many countries in the world that have nothing similar to question period. If the Conservatives were serious about reforming question period, they'd actually start giving some credible answers, and so Canadians would be less turned off by the antics of this government.